Hey, welcome back, seventh graders. Today we've got Roots of Self-Government, Chapter 4, Section 4. Chapter 4, Section 4. When we talk about roots of self-government, we're talking about the beginnings or the origins of self-government. The beginnings or the origins of the colonists starting to really kind of govern themselves and thinking about choosing their own leaders rather than relying on the leadership of England from 3,000 miles away across the Atlantic Ocean. In this section, we've got a number of vocab terms. We're going to look at 4 of them at the top of the reading, starting with mercantilism. You'll need to be familiar with this. Mercantilism, an economic theory that calls for a country to export more than it imports. An economic theory that calls for a country to export more goods than it imports. Mercantilism. Export are goods that are sent to markets outside of a country. Like exit, exports, goods that are sent to markets outside of a country. And imports, therefore, are goods that are brought into a country. Imports, goods brought into a country. And lastly, a legislature is a group of people who make laws. A group of people that make laws. We learned that, for example, in the Virginia colony, the House of Burgesses was a group of legislators who make up a legislature, a group of people who make laws. So these vocab terms can also be found on Quizlet, and they will also be posted on your Google Classroom feed as you prepare for your quizzes this week. Taking a look at our reading of Chapter 4, Section 4. England, whose economy followed the principle of mercantilism, hoped to benefit from the colony's production of exports and their need for imports. So England was hoping to benefit. England was hoping to cash in on the colony's need, on the colony's production, rather, of exports and their need for imports. The purpose of these laws was to make sure that England benefited from colonial trade. And the Navigation Acts listed certain products that colonial merchants could ship only to England. England did not want to lose the ability to make a profit on colonial trade goods. So there were a large number of goods that England said that colonists could only ship back to England. Many colonists resented or didn't really like these Navigation Acts, which restricted their ability to trade with people other than England. New England or Yankee merchants got around the laws by using triangular trade routes. And we'll see a video on these triangular trade routes in class. On these three-legged routes, Yankee traders made illegal stops for valuable goods in ports that belonged to countries other than England. So this was the one way around these Navigation Acts. Colonial traders or Yankee traders often made illegal stops in ports that belonged to countries other than England. And although each colony developed its own government, each of the 13 colonies developed their own government, the governments had very much in common. In each of the 13 colonies, a governor directed affairs and enforced the laws. Most governors were appointed by the king or by the person to whom the king had given authority over the colony to. Each of the 13 colonies, even though they were under technically the rule of England, each of the 13 colonies also had a legislature, a group of people elected to make laws for the colonies. Most legislatures had an upper and a lower house. The upper house was made up of advisors appointed by the governor, and members of the lower house of the legislature were elected by voters. We're going to talk about who could actually vote in a moment. You'd be surprised at the number of people who could not vote in the early colonial period. Each colony had its own rules about who could vote. As English subjects, colonists enjoyed certain rights. But by the 1720s, the right to vote was restricted in the colonies. And we're going to talk about that in the chart right now. So looking at the chart, which is titled The Right to Vote in the English Colonies, who could vote? You've got white male Christian property owners over the age of 21. So you had to be white, you had to be male, you had to be Christian, you had to own property, and you had to be over the age of 21. Those are 5 requirements for who could vote in the English colonies when the colonies were first established. You had to be white, you had to be male, you had to be Christian, you had to own property, and you had to be over the age of 21. Clearly, not a lot of people could vote. And if you look at the other side of the chart, who could not vote, it points out which groups of people did not qualify to vote in the English colonies. Women could not vote. Africans could not vote. Both free and enslaved Africans could not vote in most colonies. Native Americans could not vote in the English colonies. Men who did not own property could not vote in the English colonies. Men who weren't Christian could not vote in the English colonies. And some men that did not belong to a particular church in some colonies. If you did not belong to a particular church in some colonies, you could not vote at all. Okay? You could not vote at all. For example, a lot of the Puritan churches, when they put items up for a vote in some of the New England colonies, if you were not a Puritan and a member of the Puritan church, whether you were a Christian or not, you could have been a Catholic, you could have been a member of another Christian denomination, another Christian church. If you were not Puritan in some New England colonies, you were not allowed to vote on a particular issue. So clearly, the chart is showing us clearly that only one real group of people that met 5 requirements could vote. You had to be white, you had to be male, you had to be Christian, you had to own property, and you had to be over the age of 21. If you weren't that, if you weren't a male over the age of 21 who was Christian, who owned property, and you weren't white, you would fall into this category here on the right, people who could not vote in the English colonies. Let's take a look at the chart questions. And again, looking at the chart questions, what was the purpose, question 1, of the Navigation Acts? I'm sorry, not the chart questions, but the readings, the questions following the reading. The first question is going to be related directly to the reading, not to the chart. What was the purpose of the Navigation Acts? Okay, you're going to find your answer in the reading. What was the purpose of the Navigation Acts? Take a moment to work on that right now. And number 2, at the bottom of the reading, the chart skills. So again, you're going to refer to the chart up here. Which people in the colonies could not vote? Which people in the colonies could not vote? And in our next screencast, we're going to take a look at life in the colonies. What exactly was life like in the 13 English colonies? We'll talk about that in our next class together.